Hello and welcome. In the last video, I invited you to join me in meditating on a series of poems from George MacDonald's A Book of Strife in the Form of a Diary of an Old Soul. And the series that we're meditating on is December 14th through 21st. And in the first video, we went into depth on December 14th and 15th, especially making connections with the unspoken sermons and with George MacDonald's fairy tale masterwork, Lilith. In this video, we are going to pick up with December 16th, and we're going to begin and do the same thing, going pretty much line by line. The life that hath not willed itself to be must clasp the life that willed and be at peace. The life that hath not willed itself to be must clasp the life that willed and be at peace. A key point of MacDonald's theology is that if we didn't will ourselves into being, if we didn't create ourselves, that our only rest can be in the person who did will us forth, who did call us forth. And so the life that hath not willed itself to be must clasp the life that willed and be at peace. There is a wonderful passage in George MacDonald's sermon, The Word of Jesus on Prayer, where he really deeply explores the angst of knowing yourself as a being that you didn't create yourself, you can't manage yourself. What am I going to do with myself? I don't know myself. I'm an unknown I in an unknown world. And this becomes a major theme of Lilith, as Mr. Vane literally finds himself as an unknown I and an unknown world, and has to work out the riddle that he has to work out is how to get home. Mr. Raven challenges him, you are not at home, and everybody who is not at home has to go home. How do you find home? And ultimately, he learns that you have to go through yourself to reach home. And it's one home for every member of the human race. It's the heart of God. So the life that hath not willed itself to be must clasp the life that willed and be at peace, or like a leaf wind blown through chaos flee. In that wonderful passage from the Word of Jesus on prayer, MacDonald says that ungrounded self is going to be a self longing for a logos to be the soul of its cosmos, a reason to bring order to its world. And without that, there is no order in our selfhood, in our inner being, right? We are a chaos, tossed back and forth, unaware of who we really are. Just, I'm this moment, I'm that moment. I'm a slave to my impulses, to whatever suggestion comes my way. MacDonald says that like a leaf wind blown, driven back and forth, totally subject to whatever whisper of impulse comes into my ear next, a life husk into which the demons go and work their will and drive it to and fro. Really a terrifying thought, right? That we could be the sport of whatever suggestion comes our way. Free from alien wills to just drive back and forth. And this is where we have to be if we are not grounded, if we are not clasping the life that willed us. So those are really the only alternatives. Okay, so a life husk into which the demons go and work their will and drive it to and fro. a thing that neither is nor yet can cease, which uncreation can alone release. So if we're not at home, we're not free, right? Our will is not free. We're just merely subjects to impulse. A thing that neither is nor yet can cease. And this is a good description of what Kierkegaard calls despair. We're not yet, we aren't fully, and yet we can't be satisfied with who we are, but we can't make ourselves cease, right? In the Christian view, the answer to despair, to this chaos, to this angst, is not self-destructive behavior and the extreme suicide, because that doesn't end the problem. That doesn't make us not cease. We do not have the power to uncreate ourselves because we didn't make ourselves. And so death doesn't solve, death doesn't solve the riddle, this, physical death. Or just being self-destructive doesn't solve anything. Because we can't put ourselves out of being. We can't be satisfied with what we are. We can't be in the full active sense without the source of our being within us, and we in the source of our being, and yet we can't make ourselves not be either. And this is a key aspect in Lilith, that this realization has to ripen in Mr. Vane. He has to, at first, he just lives this dull, self-satisfied existence where he just lives with his own little interests, doesn't really interact with people, hasn't really given himself to love and contribute to others, seems to be satisfied with his own little life. But he has to become more and more unsatisfied in the course of being thrust into this alien world, and unsatisfied with himself, and by repeated failure too. He really, that dissatisfaction with himself really comes out, and he starts to really despise himself and want to cease, till ultimately he's ready to die, but not in the negating sense. Right? Not to put himself out of being, but to lay down that chaos and that strife and enter into rest and live indeed. Right? To come out of the death, to come out of the despair, to come out of the chaos and into real life, and no longer be driven and fro. Throughout the story in Lilith, because he refuses to rest, he is doomed to wander here and fro, and to be driven by wills other than his own, and ultimately to become a vehicle for what the demon in the story, Lilith, wants to accomplish. Although that's not what he sets out to do. Ultimately, he really becomes that vehicle for the demon to accomplish what she's trying to accomplish, because he has refused that chance to ground himself in the source of his being. Okay. So in this one, December 16th, we have more the negative side of the chaos of our beings, ungrounded. Now we turn to the positive in December 17th. But when I turn and grasp the making hand and will the making will with confidence, I ride the crest of the creation wave, helpless no more existence slave. And this is, to me, it's just this wonderful statement of the positive and this ability to ground ourselves. When I turn and grasp the making hand, and join the one who willed me into being and who is shaping me, and will with him, right? And this is what separates this from what Paul calls dead works, or what other writers in the New Testament call dead works. This is what separates it from that I am not willing according to the best of what I think I should do, but I am actually dynamically willing with the will that is making me. And this is what separates this from the barrenness and the fruitlessness of our own efforts, and makes this a dynamic participation in God's shaping of us. Okay, so now I'm grasping the making hand, I will the making will, and this perfect image to me. With confidence, I ride the crest of the creation wave, so that I'm active, I'm willing, I'm doing the Father's will, I'm obeying, but not in my own power. I'm riding the crest of the wave. I exist because God is willing me. God has sent me forth from him like a wave, and I am issuing forth from him and riding the crest of that wave, willing with him, doing with him. When I'm in that place, then I'm in the place of dynamic rest. Then I'm in that place of what the author of Hebrews calls Sabbath rest. Willing and doing, but in the strength of the eternal. And this is ultimately, where Mr. Vane gets to in Lilith, that by the very end, when he's finally willing to lay down and rest and accept the gift that is given him, the gift of sleep, the gift of receiving God's free shaping of him through the experiences that God himself brings to him. Then finally, he gets to experience the resurrection, and he gets to experience riding the crest of the creation wave and being borne along on the eternal freshness of that energy and that power. By the end, he does get to experience that. And Adam and Eve describe that life to him, and he says, now we have only to will, and the life is there. The life keeps generating ours, and all we have to do is will with it. And it's an endless life. Helpless no more existence slave. So no more am I in this place where I'm a slave, because now I'm home, and therefore I'm free. I'm no longer the sport of suggestion or impulse or circumstance. No more driven back and forth, to and fro. Now my will is free. Now I have a free will, right? Now that I'm willing with the making will. And then alone do I have a free will. MacDonald addresses this very deeply in his sermon, Freedom, and really everywhere in the unspoken sermons. Only when we're willing with God does our will come out into its full function and its true function and become free. Okay, helpless no more existent slave. In the heart of love's creating fire I stand, and God possessed in heart and soul and sense, take up the making share the making master gave. So the Father gave us a share in our own creation. We have to have a share. He's not doing it without us, right? We have a share in our own creation. The making master gave us a making share. But that making share, right, is to rejoice. 'Tis my part to rejoice in your part, right? Now I can take up the making. Now I understand how to take up the making share the making master gave. In the heart of love's creating fire I stand. And so the image of that refining. Now in Lilith it happens through sleep. So it's not, he doesn't use the metaphor of fire so much. He uses it in many other places. Of course, the Princess and the Goblin, the Princess and Curdie, wonderful examples of, in the heart of the fire, being in the heart of the fire, and what the fire does, what the rose fire does in the Princess books, and the Princess and Curdie books, is it brings the current self, the time-bound self, into congruence with the ideal self, the self that God has called forth. He says in Curdie, these brought your true hands so close to your flesh hand that they work together now. That's what the fire has done. It brings that congruence between our potential self and our actual self, our God-meant self and our self in action. Because we do have to become, but we do that by taking up the making share the making master gave. We're not left on our own to try to figure that out. Okay, let's move now. 14 through 17 make this wonderful unit. But then we move on, and the other ones really do help to complete this thought. So we're going to go on to December 18th. That man alone who does the Father's works can be the Father's Son, yea, only he who Son-like can create can ever be. This is a really startling thought. Listen to what he's saying here. Only he who Son-like can create can ever be. How close do you think we are to being able to participate like Jesus in actual creation, right? And yet, MacDonald is saying only when we can do that, only when we can create like Jesus, can we be said to fully be in the active sense. That's a pretty startling thought. And this, again, takes us back to the unspoken sermons, especially the creation in Christ. Now remember, the way that the Son creates is that all things are created through him, right? The Son creates by yielding himself to the Father's creating, right? And so we get to do that. We get to take up the making share the making master gave, and learn to join the kind of life that Jesus has. And in the creation in Christ, MacDonald says that Jesus made life. He made life. He made human life by living it, by living the life of union with the Father's will. And we get to join him. And then we have life when we learn to live to the Father the way that Jesus lives to the Father. Okay? And that's the only true human life. Then. All right. So that man alone who does the Father's works can be the Father's Son. So it is imperative, right? We can't get away from that, right? He who does what is right is righteous, right? We can't get away from that necessity of obedience, of doing the Father's will, right? But the freedom here is that we do that the way that Jesus does it, by giving ourselves up to God to create through us, right? The Father's creating, we are the vehicle of his creating, and the one he's creating through. And that holds in regard to the very little actions and obediences of our daily life, as well as what we think of as the bigger things. Who with God wills not is no son, not free. The next lines. And that we've already been talking about, right? Quite a bit. So just reiterating that. O Father, send the demon doubt that lurks behind the hope out into the abyss. O Father, send the demon doubt that lurks behind the hope out into the abyss. Why is doubt such a big enemy? Not all of us struggle with doubt in the same way that MacDonald struggled with doubt. MacDonald struggled with that, with, God, are you there at all? Do you exist? Are you who I think you are? Are you good? MacDonald struggled with that. Not all of us struggle in the same way. But I think where we do all struggle in terms of doubt is receiving life. Because faith is the ability to receive. As Kierkegaard says well in Fear and Trembling. Faith is the ability to receive. And do we really believe that God is can we really believe in a practical way that God is inviting us in that way, in the intense way that we've been describing here? And there's that demon doubt that says, I'm not somebody that can be related to the Father. It's just not me. I can't do this. I'm not up to this. This isn't for me. Right? And we listen to that, and we consign ourselves to slavery. Right? And so I think we all do deal with this demon doubt that lurks behind the hope, and really taking hold of it and saying, this gift is meant for me, and I'm taking it. Certainly it takes Mr. Vane a really long time, and Lilith, I think it takes a lot of us a really long time to come out of that. Because the answer, right, to despair, despair is those messages about ourselves that are forced on us, like that tormenting knowledge, I'm not who I want to be, I am who I don't want to be. And we're bombarded and we're flooded with these destructive messages about ourselves that sink us down into this despair and this death. But the answer is not to try to replace all those negative I am statements with positive I am statements and saying, well, I am complete in Christ. I am covered by his blood. I am full of his righteousness. I have all that I need in Christ. The answer is not to try to replace the negative I am statements with the positive I am statements. The answer is a grounded life of being able to get beyond having to justify our own being and know that our being exists, our selfhood is safe between us and God. It exists in the space between us and God. It is freely and continuously being shaped by God. It is safe in that process of shaping. And it's not ours to grasp. It's not ours to hold on to or to shape or to try to define. It's being defined by God. And so we can send that demon doubt that lurks behind the hope out into the abyss. Who trusts in knowledge, all its good shall miss. And this, I think, is what addresses that idea of false faith as trying to puff ourselves up and say, okay, this is the truth. This is the truth. This is the truth. I believe it. I believe it. I believe it. I believe it. Right? It's going to become true now for me. Right? That is really the trusting in knowledge. Right? The hoping that just knowing it will do it. Right? And it is true in a sense, right? That beholding of the truth is what shapes us. God is light, and that light enters us and it shapes us. And so in that sense, right, all we do need is just to see. But it's not like taking and running with the words and trying to make them true. Right? If we trust in knowledge in that way, we're going to miss all the good of it. The words are true. The thoughts are true. That it is the gospel. And yet it'll never be realized in our beings that way. Until we really stop with the back and forth and the I am statements altogether, and really live the life that he's been describing in the preceding poems. Because it's really not, selfhood is really not about who we are. Am I this? Am I that? Am I the being that just messed up? Am I this ideal being that God sees in me, this potential? What am I? It's not that. It is the invitation to be. The invitation to be. And know that our being is safe in God's hands. And it's being shaped. Okay. Now, on to December 19th. Thy beasts are sinless and do live before thee. Thy child is sinful and must run to thee. Thy angels sin not, and in peace adore thee. But I must will, or never more be free. He's wrestling with that idea. And look, I can't just live in this ideal space. I'm constantly having to do things. Right? And when I act on the wrong, it creates damage. right? So I have to will. I am bound by this necessity to do. I can't just sit here, right? I have to live my life. What do I do? I have to will. To be free. But I must will or never more be free. And then he answers it. I from thy heart came. How could I ignore thee? Back to my home I hurry, haste, and flee. So the home, right? I came from your heart. You called me forth. I am right now because you're calling me forth. So I will bring my being back home. Back to my home I hurry, haste, and flee. That's the answer. To ground my being in its source. I've got a will to live, but just trying to do the best I can is not cutting it, right? I from your heart came. How could I ignore you? How could I not focus on seeing? So, back home. Back home is the answer. Back to my home I hurry, haste, and flee. There I shall dwell, love praising evermore thee. I love the synthesis of this, and Lilith, how he says, Mr. Raven says, home is the one place that you can go in to and go out of. There's that freedom to go in and out. And this, I believe, it's a reference to John 10. They shall go in and go out and find pasture. There I shall dwell and be free of the Father's house, the universe. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and go into December 20th. My holy self. You know what? I was going to dive into that, but I think it might be better to save the 20th and the 21st for a final video. So let's go ahead and break here. We're almost at a half hour. And then we'll come back with December 20th and 21st. Thank you.